Viktor Trukhnov, director of Kyiv office Green Panda Games. Let's applaud. Please welcome. Yeah. And our guests. Rotem Eldor, publisher manager TabTale.
Потом просто.
Yeah. Please go.
Мне просто говорить?
Welcome. Alina Gribanova, BDM Boombit. Yeah. Lolita Suleimanova, Homa Games, publishing manager. Please, more applause. They love it. Alexander Shea, publishing manager, Voodoo.io. Eugen Quiring, business development and overall awesome guy. Yeah. Lion Studios. And Tamara Feiman, business development and publishing lead, Gismart. Okay.
He's somewhere here, yeah.
Is Tamara here? Yeah, please welcome. Okay. So I think I have a mic for both of you, and I think you can share it between of you. So enjoy.
All right, guys. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for surviving last night. That's appreciated, yeah. You're doing a good job. We're here to talk about the hyper-casual games, and we can definitely say that 2016 and 2018 were the years of unexpected growth and unprecedented growth, with many hits, with many success stories, and with many strong players on this market. Well, we are here to talk about what was in 2019 and about 2020. And here's the right guys to say about this market and answer your questions and maybe say something really special to us. Please welcome one again. All right, guys, so how was this year for you? How was the 2019? Maybe you can say about some favorite games, some hits you launched. Maybe about some hits that was launched by another companies.
I can start. Hi, I'm from Gismart. And for us, it's actually quite a big year because we entered hyper-casual market. We created an in-house division and publishing of hyper-casual games, and we launched we launched already 4 games, both hyper-casual and idols, and Cool Goal was a great hit for us. So we are pretty happy to be here, to be in the industry in general, and we also face some difficult moments, some issues, some problems that we have, but still we see it as a challenges rather than just problems that we want to quit. Yeah.
Hi there, Eugen from my studios. This year has been amazing for us. We've grown quite team-wise and portfolio-wise. We had many titles sitting at the tops by now. I think 2 to highlight are Mr. Bullet, which we launched, which made it into top 20 games at 2019 iOS charts. I think 1 also to highlight is I Feel Good, which actually made in a GQ article. So yeah, pretty good.
Thanks. 2019 was an amazing year. Once again, for Voodoo, we're super humbled to be working with so many fantastic studios around the world, and that's really been the big focus of the year, is how can we better support our studios? And that means adjusting through the year to what are the trends, For example, how can we protect our studios against copies? How can we support them in launching faster, better, optimizing their live games, making sure that we can continue to deliver on multi-million-dollar payouts for our studios so that they can scale and become, powerhouses in hyper-casual. In terms of games, that's kind of secondary. The games come as a result of these fantastic relationships that we've built and tightly knit with our studios. Some games include that I've been lucky to work on, Roller Splat in January with Neon Play. We worked on Aqua Park with Cassette, which launched in May or June. Dig It around the same period with Racket Spell. And what I really, retain from these lessons is these studios are really awesome to work with.
Cool, great results. Yes, I completely agree that 2019 was a year of growth. For Homa Games, actually, it was a year of hyper-growth. We started as just a bunch of people in the beginning of the year, and now the studios that we work with have their own dedicated squads working for them. And, looking at the end of 2019, it's interesting that, yeah, we tripled in size members-wise, but half of the team is actually tech. And it's interesting, but it's not surprising, because what I really loved about 2019 as the direction it took, it was a milestone that showed that it's not that easy anymore to jump on a hyper-casual boat. It's not only about having a game with good KPIs and publishing it through the networks. It's about driving the innovation. It's about creating the tools that are missing in the industry. It's about creating the services to make it more effective, faster, and easier for both sides. This year showed actually the strongest players in hyper-casual. And in my opinion, it's the players that position themselves more as the tech company before being a publishing company. Talk about the games. I think everybody agrees here it's really hard to find a favorite game out of your own company, because all of them are like your babies. But I can't not miss the game called Combine It, because thank you, Dmitry, he's here, who worked on this, because it was really nice and amazing work together, and problem solving at anything that jumped out at us through the process. And I can't also not mention Skyroller, because it's just a classic by the book hyper-casual game with such easy mechanics, but working so well.
For Boombit, 2019 is actually it's about to start, since, as Lola mentioned, I totally agree, it's getting extremely hard to get to hyper-casual market. Myself, I joined Boombit in August 2019, so basically I'm literally on this stage of jumping in, and it's hard for me to say about the success. I think it's just about to come. It's definitely, what I can say from my perspective, it's extremely exciting for me to understand what's going on, to see how tough competition is, which actually makes it even more exciting from my perspective. In terms of games, again, I don't have anything to brag about from Boombit IP, but my favorite game is actually Aqua Park IO. I found it one of the most it was a cocktail of all the hooks that could get the player. It has competition, it has drive, it has graphics, it has innovation. So in my opinion, that was like one of the most top games, at least in this year. Well, we're going to see what's going to come in 2020, but that's already a next question. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. For Crazy Labs, of course, it's been the year of Amaze. We have almost 50 million downloads worldwide. And what it's teaching us that actually the studio that created it is two indie guys from the Ukraine. We started in 2018 to work with these guys. It's their fourth game with us, and the persistence that we saw from this team is a high level of following the game designing suggestions that we had for them. We had a lot to teach them, and they had a lot to teach us. And it shows that it's a game of relationship, and every relationship starts with a conversation. And as we go from not just using the developers for the initial idea, but to have an ongoing relationship with them, because the games are going through the live ops after the initial launch. So it's an ongoing process of a year of completing A/B testing and creating better games. So that's our focus, and that's what we learned this year, that it's more of a communication-based game, and the industry is turning more for the developers instead of actually the publishers.
Thank you, guys. That was pretty awesome. Thank you. And yeah, we mentioned about 2020, and I actually have the obligatory question about the future of hyper-casual. And can you give us some trend prediction for 2020? Can you give us some points about the market change? Maybe you will give us some advices for developers for creation the games in 2020. Something about future, something about the next big year.
So since I have the mic, I'll start.
We can go like from you to back.
Cool. Yeah, so this past year, like every year in the last 3 years, I think, people keep asking when is it going to stop? Is it like a bubble that's going to burst? How is hyper-casual still something? The games are so stupid. And we see that actually it's a numbers game, right? Everyone is a gamer today. Everyone plays games. Everyone plays it not to be better at something, not for competition, but they play to kill time. They play it on their way to work or waiting or talking to the mother on the phone or something like that. And as long as the industry grows, as long as the demand goes, so the supplies is growing. And we can see better games coming out every week from everyone. And until that is going to stop, the hyper-casual industry is not going to stop. See, we're at the end of 2019, and it's only growing. The numbers are growing. Games are getting better. So to answer the question in one word, it's going to be no. It's not going to change, at least in our perspective.
Totally agree, and on my opinion, my favorite quote is that 1 year ago there were some discussions that hyper-casual is dead, and afterwards we had Shea games who knocked everyone down. So I definitely think it's not going to be dead, moreover it's growing, and I also think it's really hard to say that the 2,000 billion market can be dead with the users who are playing these games. That's the big niche, and I think it's actually going to be even growing. So it's more like a question about what kind of trends are gonna be there, what kind of like changes are gonna be there, but it's definitely gonna evolve, and it's interesting to see what kind of like subgenres are we gonna have, if we're gonna have any. So that's something I'm really curious to see, and I'm sure like developers will be actually those one who will be creating those trends. But yeah, the answer is definitely that it's about to move on.
Yeah, I would add that what would actually change is the processes, and everything would change based, again, on innovation. For example, the publishing phase will be so crazy for developers, so it's really important to keep up with the latest tech and latest tools that publishers create for you. And about the trend, I think Alexander once said that hyper-casual is not a trend anymore, and I completely agree with that. And if you listen to John Hook talking about hyper-casual, he always makes this observation that hyper-casual is not a category in the App Store. Hyper-casual lives and thrives across multiple categories in the App Store. So if the trend changes, hyper-casual will be stable. Everything will change inside these categories. So you, as a hyper-casual developer, what it means, you are trained to deliver very high-quality product in very short amount of time. You're trained to test your idea, and if it doesn't work, you scrape it out and you start with a new idea. So with this set of skills, you always win. It doesn't matter where the trend goes. If you have the right publisher who also perceive themselves more of a content publishing entity, you will always be on the top. So really, don't worry. You have all the cards in your hands.
Thanks, Alina. So it's very hard to say this is the trend for 2020. At Voodoo, we're fortunate enough to see a portion of the market before it lands onto the App Store. And so we are able to say, well, in the next 2 weeks, in the next 4 weeks, in the next 6 weeks, this is what we see happening on the store. This is what we see evolving. And that short-term time frame is actually really important. It's an edge that we're super fortunate to have, and that we share carefully with the studios that we work with. So it's very hard to say, well, in 6 months, this is what's going to be happening in hyper-casual. But I do see a couple of trends that are a bit broader than just product or game trends, that are broader than saying, okay, runners or IOs or puzzle games are going to outperform in the next 6 months. And those are, I think, some trends that are fading from 2019. So one of those trends is kind of more shallow games, and I don't think we need to name any, but basically games that have lower CPIs, that are figurative, that are therefore relatable in their advertising. But when you download them, you play them for a very short period of time. Maybe you get a couple of RVs and FS that are kind of forced onto players, so full screen ads. But we don't see these as valuable multi-million payout games for studios. And I think increasingly the market is understanding that. So in a way, this is a great trend because I think these games are going to start to fade more and more because it's less about can I get my game in the top 10 than it is about, well, can I actually make it worthwhile for my studio, in the long term. The second trend I see as fading are copies. I think that games that are identical to each other or very similar or adjacent are going to fade, not only because of the work that Voodoo is doing to ensure that the incentives are low in order to protect IP and to protect studios globally, and that's really important for us. We've invested a lot in both our processes and our support in order to ensure that studios are protected against these tendencies. So but also because copies are ultimately not a profitable business model. They generate a low amount of margins because CPIs are very quickly burned out on games that come second into the store and that are similar. We've seen this over a number of games and in 2019, and so that behavior is fading into 2020. And just to finish up, I don't want to take all the time here, but just to finish up on trends we see going into 2020, what does this mean for studios? What does this mean for publishers? We think that it means that studios and the relationship between studios and publishers is going to be vital going into 2020. And so we've reorganized all of our structure to make sure that we could go into the year with a strong edge once again. That means creating a launch ops team, a live ops team, an optimization team, growing our marketing team. And Voodoo today is 220 people, 250 people focused on publishing, based in Paris. And what's vital also for us is to make sure that we can cover fantastic geographies like Kyiv, like the Ukraine, but also globally, centered in Paris with obviously local capabilities, but you want to make sure that your product knowledge is in a focused core team. And to do that, we've decided to refocus all of our efforts on the publishing team to make sure that we were growing a highly skilled and centralized team that covers all geographies centrally.
Thank you. Thanks.
I'd say 3 takeaways to go into 2020, the hyper-casual game market. First one would be consolidation. We're seeing big players coming to the market, snatching up a big market share. We've seen Voodoo, for example, taking strategic investments into studios like 8 Games. We've seen Ubisoft with Green Panda doing strategic investments. We'll see also other big players or non-gaming investors trying to enter the market just because it's so profitable. This is one thing to keep in mind. So it became, as an indie, more difficult to be successful without a publisher. The second thing would be innovation. I also agree here that we have to think about different business models, maybe innovating, even taking as example Digit from Racket Spell, where you would monetize not only with ads, but with in-app purchases where it works. Also different kind of games. We've seen it with I Feel Good, where you would actually test a game before it becomes a game. So those kind of approaches. And the third thing would be also diversification. So we try, with example for Coin Trip, we tried a little bit outside of hyper casual, going a different direction. I would expect other studios trying it a little bit as well. And for developers to take away for going into 2020 would be trying to find the kind of business model that works for you, trying to find a publisher that works for you, because all kinds of publishers make different games. Some are specialized in idle, some are specialized in arcade, some are specialized in weird kind of games, whatever. Try to find the publisher that works for you, the terms that work for you, and make good games.
Thanks.
My colleagues have covered quite a lot, but I would like to mention that new markets might be a new trend of 2020, especially China is a little bit underestimated right now by hyper-casual publishers and hyper-casual developers. But China is such a huge market and such a huge opportunity to not to be there. Just as an example, the number of iOS devices in China is the same of the whole number of devices in the United States. So by just launching without any big limitations on iOS China and having quite a good and right approach of promotion and game creation, it might give you a great value to the revenue, to the downloads, and to the game in general. So I would say that while you're creating the game, just keep in mind and explore a bit about Chinese users, Chinese region, see what are the trends there. There are a lot of women there playing, and they're pretty competitive. They like challenge, and this is completely other thing comparing to the Western market. But maybe it's also a good thing to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you all for your great answers. I mean, that's perfect. And actually, Alexander mentioned about the copies, and one of my questions, let's say, if there is some game is on market that is huge and successful, and let's say, do you suggest to take an inspiration from this game, or you always suggest to go for a new, innovative idea? And what's the risks in both of these variants?
Maybe my colleague want to answer first.
No comments on that.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think there's both. No comment? Yeah. I think there's both there's an ethical question in there, which is really important, and it's the first reason why Voodoo has been, working very hard to protect studio IP. We think that it's wrong for a studio to come along and copy a performing game, just because it takes a few days, right, to come in and to push it. It's wrong for two reasons. I mean, it's wrong because it's just it's a shame, frankly, that some of the platforms out there, distribution platforms, don't take care of protecting IP. But it is a complicated and tough issue to regulate, essentially. But it's also wrong because actually, in terms of profitability, it doesn't make any sense. So it sends a wrong signal to studios because they think, okay, this game is top performing, I'll inspire from the visuals or the gameplay or whatever it is. I'll build something similar and push it, and it's bound to work. It'll probably work in testing. It'll work at a small scale. You'll find some decent CPIs and great retentions. And as soon as you start pushing the game in the top charts, you'll start to realize actually the CPIs get burned super quickly. You're picking off where the other game is already scaling and it doesn't work. The economics, if you talk to any marketing team, don't work. So yeah, for those two reasons, ethical and business, it just doesn't make sense.
Yes, I completely agree. And for us, it's beyond results. Maybe where I disagree a little bit is that it's hyper casual. If you have capabilities and tools and services, you can have great results on both the games that were inspired by another game or a game that are completely new. And we saw both of this over 2019. But it's beyond results. It's the mood we have in the company. We are generally more motivated and excited to work with crazy ideas, and the rewards that you have, rewards by seeing the great results coming from this crazy idea is much better. We love to work with the studios and developers who are willing to also crack their skulls, bring their brains out, and come up with these crazy ideas. And the life is really crazy enough. There are so many things to get inspired by from your offline life than from the games that are already on the App Store.
have 2 points I'm thinking about in terms of this question. So first one is what I see myself from developers who are pitching the games. I see actually something that is already there. So all the prototypes are very similar to the hits that are there. It's 95% of prototypes. So what does it say to me? It tells me that it's pretty hard to look forward to look for something innovative, and maybe it's more about combining something. Maybe it's more about taking the existing mechanics that was super successful and adding something there. So it's hard for me to answer this question, but I think this is what I see and this is what's happening. Second point is that what I also see is that basically there is at least, let's take one top mechanic, and we have hits from all of these mechanics from top 3 publishers. So what does it mean? It means that actually, that it's actually happening that all these copies and all these IPs are switching between one another, and basically, then it means that we are not ethical here, or maybe it just means that this is how the business works. It's basically a philosophical question I have. I don't have an answer for this, so. If you guys have any thoughts, we can maybe discuss it later, but it's a really huge question, and in my opinion, there is no exact answer, because it will be happening, in my opinion, and it will be happening that some of the games will be floating, and some of the games will be looking similar, but what I agree about with Alexander is that is the success. So is it about if it's the copy, if it's the clone, is it going to be successful? Most likely at the beginning you will have the good metrics, but then it won't perform that well. However, maybe it's all about the question of the scale. So if it's a clone and if you have enough traffic to push it, well, maybe it's going to be successful. So yeah, some food for thoughts for you.
I actually agree with Alina. I think that developers, and you know it basically better than us, that you get inspired by everything, not just games. You get inspired by Instagram pages and YouTube pages and a lot of things to create games. If we think about it, most of the game mechanics, at least in hyper-casual, have already been invented. And it's our job as the publishers to steer our developers in the right direction to create something that might have been inspired by someone, if it's a game or if it's something else, but to have an innovative approach, to have something that's very intuitive to your users, to have something that is, it's a twist. Because otherwise we're just going to fall into a bidding war and CPI war, and it's not going to work for everyone. So that's our job, at least as the publishers, to get our developers into the right direction. And although you might have been inspired by some other thing, we need to create something that's going to have, like we call it in Crazy Labs, we call it the wow factor or the wow effect. Something that we just can't explain, but is a really nice twist and would get users to really play your game.
Thanks.
I can also.
Oh, yeah, please.
I also want to say that it's a lot about ambition of you as a developer, because it's also great to think while you started doing games at the first place, and having this great opportunity that your game will be played by millions and millions of users. For example, we at Gismart are actually keen on supporting the teams who want to do something really great and that is not on the market. That's why we welcome teams, actually, who is also want to do it with us.
Thanks. Thank you all. Thank you all. Oh, sorry.
One thing maybe to add, it also comes down to speed of execution, right? We've seen always picking publishers up games that competitor teams do, and then just executing faster. So you want to focus as a publisher on, like, even if it's a similar game or something, even if it's soft launch with another team, if you can execute faster, you have this kind of advantage of time to market. You have the expertise in data. We've faced it ourselves. We had games in self-launch from our teams, which we have picked up by other publishers as well, and they just could execute higher quality faster. It's just how it is, unfortunately. But yeah.
Thanks. Thanks, guys. And we actually talk about the idea, right? So you should have an idea, like crazy idea. Imagine that in this room, a lot of developers has its own crazy idea, some innovative idea. We do all judge by CPI, by retention at the end. But can you imagine some early indicators for the developers that can show us that this project could be really good? And do you have some examples in your own history about such projects, if you have one?
Yeah, we've seen those one. We know a couple of publishers are testing out ways how you actually can check the potential mass marketability of a game without actually having the game in the store. I know a couple of competitors do it. We do it ourselves. It gives you kind of an indication how unique your game is, how well it would scale, and then you build out a game out of that. So it decreases your time and effort you put actually making a game and the build, and then just to realize, okay, metrics aren't there. There are examples where we saw, for example, like barber shaving kind of games doing very well very early on, right? So this is kind of an approach I would also expect to see in the next year. Publishers actually trying to have those kind of models, have those kind of data analysis very early on, but also like in a unique, innovative way. Don't try to make another 500 Helix Jump clone or whatever. Try to find those kind of niches in games, to make it really weird, really funny, really unique.
That's a really good question. How can you tell whether a game idea will have potential? We're one of those publishers that's working on testing games before they're built, testing whether there's a market appetite for them by doing CTR testing on Facebook. I think there's a question, before that, which is, I have an idea for a game. Is it going to be successful? Before I build a visual for it, at least, and that's a really hard question to answer. That's partly why we've built out a large publishing team. Is you need to enable conversations, we think, between studios and publishing managers in order to really do a case-by-case basis and to review ideas one by one. I mean, so I can't really answer the question, off the top of my head. That's kind of why we've built that team. We've seen a lot of ideas. Some of them succeed, some of them fail in the past, and we try to bring those insights and those learnings and to share them with the studios we work with closely. But I would agree, that newness and whether there's depth in your game, whether it is hyper casual and instantly understandable, those are key factors in driving success.
Yeah, all of them great points. That's why in Homa Games we built something called HPP, which Homa Games Production Plan, is that aggregation of the ideas that we tried, the ideas that we have, then turning them with our game designers into real ready to make ideas and creating prototypes. Then we're checking which of them worked, which of them didn't work. So trying to have some kind of analysis, what works on the market or doesn't work on the market, and the same we do for each studio that we work with actually. It is, again, it's hyper casual. You can't just discard an idea if you think it's not interesting without testing it. So one of the things we could do is that you don't even have to create a prototype. We create an animation through a 3D Max or something like this, and then we just test it on CTR and only then we choose ideas from the CTR test that you actually do the prototype, and then we go further than that.
I would like to say that I'm thinking about actual approach of how to think about the potential games you're going to do. So the thoughts I have in mind is that it's very important and crucial to have critical thinking in this kind of preparation. For example, the developers think that their game is the best because it's their baby, and that's what I see all over the place, and that makes sense. I would be the same if I would be a developer, and if I would be pitching my own prototype, I would be like, my eyes would be blurred. But what I'm thinking is important to have in mind is to actually try to think critically, as much critically as you can, and to play as much games as you can to see what kind of games are performing the best, what kind of games are performing less, better, and stuff like that, and to try to come up with something new. And the other point I have in mind is sometimes when I play a game, I have this, maybe what you mentioned, like a wow effect, something like it kind of hooks you. That's already a great indicator for me that it potentially could be a successful game. Of course, we are all talking about tests, but I guess the question from Victor was that we are talking about like what do we do before the test? Like test, it's clear, CTR, CPI, retention, that's obvious, but how do we actually move on? How do we move on after the prototype? And do we have like this a green light to move forward with the production and pitching it to the publisher? So to me, it's all about like this, it's very hard to describe in words, but this wow, let's call it wow effect, and this like feeling that, hey, I actually like it, I want to play more, I think about the game, I want to come back to it, even if it's like few levels. I think it's probably the maybe a good indicator to at least move forward. And then, of course, you get to the roulette with the tests, and then you check it, and you do iterations, and you change things, because it's always like this balance between CPI and retention, but that's already another question.
Thank you. I won't repeat what everyone said about CTR, CPI videos. It's all correct. We've all been doing it in the last couple of months. What I want to add is about the onboarding. So people decide whether to download your game or not in the first, 3 seconds of the video. It has to be something incredible, and it also needs to feel intuitive to the users. So the onboarding is very important. If you see the most successful hyper-casual games, like all of the games that these guys publish, you know what to expect just by looking at the icon and the name of the game. So it's starting very early. It's starting even in the onboarding of the game. And we all like to be surprised as well. You know, we test a lot of games, we test a lot of videos, and sometimes we say, you know what, let's just test it, and you get 7-cent CPI, or you think that this game is going to be the next hit, and you test it, and it's going to be $3. So we're surprised, for better, for worse. Keep testing, keep trying, work on the elements that everyone are speaking about the most important things into creating the hyper-casual game, and also think about the onboarding of it. And I think you didn't speak yet.
Me? Yeah.
Yeah, I would add that just look what is around you. Take a look into Pinterest, TikTok, Instagram. A lot of ideas are there already, and you will get the trends. That's something that is already popular, that is already have its user base, and just add some game mechanics, cool game mechanics that is engaging you, and it might give you a great twist into top charts.
Yeah, please.
Short addition here. I think no one from us sitting here will have 100% idea what works, definitely. I think a lot of us will have an idea what doesn't work. So if you want to make a game which has an unlikely chance to be going in hyper-casual, just make an endless arcade jump and run with 8 buttons, pixel art, with a text tutorial. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. My next question is follow. Well, is hyper-casual designed to be only ads monetized genre? Will we see an emergence of in-app purchases in hyper-casual in 2020?
I would add not only in-app purchases, but also subscription. I think that hyper-casual, it's not something separate. It's not something that is out of like traditional, I don't know, old-style gaming. Not at all. And we can see hyper-casual games in Apple Arcade. This is also there. It has great quality, great user experience, and no ads. So I think that a lot of changes are coming together with different new technologies and new trends. And there are a lot of ways of monetizing players. So it's just you have to find the right balance, how to do that. The right balance, the bigger margin.
I agree with that. So this was an example I mentioned earlier from Record Spell. We see definitely a trend for games which have a subscription model, which have kind of in-app purchase. We've seen it with Tomb of the Mask from Legendary. We've seen it in our games as well, Heavy Glass Love Balls. So it will definitely be a trend to make games monetize a little bit differently with in-app purchases where it makes sense, right? It's not a general trend, but like, publishers are thinking about making their games more monetizing within purchases. And that's for that.
Thanks. Agreed. I think there's a couple of points on how do you build a deeper or higher LTV games, and part of that is how do you do that with a hyper casual game. And I agree. I think Dig It is a great example of how you optimize your ad balance between kind of full screen ads, rewarded videos. Where do they come? What are they incentivizing? Does it increase the user experience? Does the ad actually increase the user experience? And when do you show them? What frequency? We've now built out a team dedicated purely to that, to figuring out what is the best hyper-casual kind of ad display for each and every game that we publish on the market. So that is a big focus for us going into next year. Then there's a separate question: is the segment sustainable altogether? What we're seeing is absolutely. It's still a growing sector. We're seeing profitability on our games, always going up, even post-launch. I mean, consistently on average. It depends on the game, but on average, everything's going up. So we're very bullish, very optimistic for the next year. But there is another segment, we think, potentially that has deeper LTVs, higher CPIs, and we're looking into that carefully as well. And it's too early to tell. So far, hyper-casual is clearly outperforming, but we will be sharing insights into that in 2020 for sure.
Thanks.
I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that. I think all of these valid points that I agree with, but I want to bring something else to the table and would be very interested to see about your opinion. If we look at hyper-casual from what made hyper-casual be and exist is its audience, and the audience is basically our non-players who are not emotionally involved in your game. They're just there to have fun and leave. So usually people are using in-app purchases when the game play is so obscure that the gameplay slows down so badly that you have to pay something for it. And if we put this kind of mechanic before day 7, we have a big risk that the user will just leave because there's other games on the market that you don't have to in-app purchase to play. And if you put it after day 7, day 14, we'll just have whatever we have right now. So I don't think in 2020 in-app purchases will grow that much in pure hyper-casual games. But of course, some hyper-casual games can evolve into more detailed and in-depth games. But here, what will play a big role is the execution time. Now we know the execution time is very important, and in order to build a game and to push it to the charts already with the in-app purchases inside and with all the in-game economy made, it's quite hard as of now. So if you as a developer keep up with this and work with this, and as we are as a publisher will do that the same, I think only then in-app purchases will increase in hyper-casual games.
Very interesting point, actually, and I would agree about this sort of like a direction. In my opinion, what I had in mind and what I've seen, what's happening, like those were like rumors around this industry that hyper-casual games are evolving to the games where where you are not going to be playing the game. You're just going to be looking at the game, and that will be whole gameplay. So in this case, I think the answer is that there are not going to be a chance to survive for in-app purchases. But what is going to probably happen is that in-app purchases are going to be part of a new evolving genre, which is going to be probably some sort, let's say, deep casual, or like it's casual plus. Yeah, it's a good point. I think you're right about the audience, that this is the audience that is not sticking to the game. They're not gamers. They're just like playing it like for, I don't know, a few days and then they're gone. So it probably will move on, but it's gonna create a subgenre basically. Another point that I had in mind, which is also very interesting, and I don't know, I wanted to share it with you. I had a discussion about the hyper-casual topic at DevGam in Minsk, and we had a conclusion that hyper-casual is not a genre, hyper-casual is a monetization model. And basically, this is it. And as soon as it's going to change, and as soon as there are going to be more changes in the monetization model, then it's going to be a different genre. So it's a very interesting switch of your mind to think about hyper-casual as not a genre, because it basically can have a lot of different components. So it's also another topic to brainstorm about, and it's also curious to hear your thoughts about it later. Thanks.
All right, two interesting theories. I agree that the hyper-casual genre, as you call it, it's something that users play. They quick to download, quick to understand the game, and then quick to live. We've seen a trend in the last couple of months then of oddly satisfying games, like cleaning windows or washing something. It was really fun, and you can see that the users are quick to leave these games. So we are seeing a trend of these super satisfying games, but I think it will be gone in a month or two. I think it's a lot of educating the market. So if we create games that will make the users stay longer, if we give them more content, we give them more reasons to stay and play the games, we can monetize with in-app purchases or even subscription-based like Apple Arcade. If we keep creating these fast prototypes, fast games, and then we will make users live fast, we will stay indefinitely with the ad monetization.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. That was pretty clear answers, and I think we have 10 minutes left, so I want to maybe some questions about, yeah, a lot of questions already. We have one, please.
I have a quite simple question. There is lots of hyper-casual games, and you can divide them like in groups, like game about cars, balls, more balls, or something, destruction, something. Is there some genres you prefer more among the others, and maybe there is some no games that you shouldn't even exist?
Okay, I'll just answer it in one word and give it to the others. So we see games that are basically talking to the mass audience, to all the genders, all ages. If you use abstract avatars like balls instead of dragons, instead of princesses, you will attract more users. You will aim for the lowest common denominator that everyone has. If you have a game on dragons, then male audience will come. If you have a game with unicorns, female audience will come. If you have a game with the avatar is a ball or a shape, you might attract the mass audience.
I can say as well, very right, but also as publishing entity, we're trying not to put ourselves in the boxes and not to go only with one kind of subgenre of hyper-casual. Like as I mentioned, that hyper-casual is not a category in the App Store, it's across all the categories, so trying to be very open-minded on that. Of course, you have to follow these rules of hyper-casual. It can be stylized, it can be in the landscape, and it can be an RPG game where you have to open up the worlds. But also, we perceive ourselves, yes, as a tech company, as a publishing service, but also mostly as the content producer, and you as a hyper-casual developer, you're a content creator. So if you apply your hyper-casual skills into any kind of genre, even more casual, so maybe something will come out of this. So don't worry to experiment anyways, and still send us more experimental prototypes. We're happy to test them and see if it's going to be the next hyper-casual of, I don't know, to 2025.
I would just add to that. I think the genres that you identified, so cars, balls, and whatever, those are more visual, I think, themes in your game. We tend to think those are interchangeable to some extent. What really drives the performance of a game, at least the way we see it at Voodoo, is the gameplay, the core gameplay. And you can divide genres within gameplay, for example, IO games. Each have their challenges. IOs, runners, puzzles, for example. to name three. IOs, for example, we've noticed that CPIs can be a bit higher on average, harder to monetize sometimes with ad frequencies being lower. But conversely, they can be very viral, like Aquapark, like Crowd City, like Whole, and virality is a huge driver of success. Runners, for example, are an interesting genre because they have embedded progression systems that allow minimal development, especially if it's procedurally generated, to keep users for 7 days and retained and entertained. But they're a bit tougher to build because that 3-second core mechanic needs to be just absolutely perfect and satisfying and rewarding, challenging, deep. Puzzles, on the other hand, have a very different dynamic. Hard to get a puzzle below kind of 30, 20 cents CPI. It can be done if you're designing a hyper-casual puzzle, but that's a different challenge. Content comes later. How do you continue to stimulate users? Roller Splat, Dig It being two examples of successful hyper-casual puzzle games this year. So each genre within hyper-casual comes with its rewards and challenges, but you have to identify those genres well, and using visual terminology is not going to get you there because that's more of a CPI post-launch kind of tweak, at least the way we see it at Voodoo.
Yeah, I'd say you'd have to try to balance something which is relatable, neutral, abstract, which everyone can relate to. So I think Idle Coffee Cup is a good example. Everyone can relate to coffee. But don't make it too abstract. You see stuff happen like with the Maze Roller Splat, or like if you put in Color, Rush, Jumper, whatever 3D into the App Store, you will have like 500 games looking like that, right? So you want to have something like which sticks a little bit out of the noise in the market, but also make it like really neutral and relate to a bigger audience.
Recently, we launched a game that called Cleon, and it was top 1 on the Chinese App Store. And it is a game about a Greek politician. It has really out-of-the-box art, and I think it's a great example of the region, on the market, on the actually goals that you're putting in, and on the ideas that you have. So if you have an idea of making the game about this exact ball, it might not work on one market and not work on the other, but it's still good game, might be. And it's still a great, it's still a chance to actually finish the game and actually develop it. So I would say, I would green light and yes, just on trying and pushing new and new ideas.
Maybe some applause for our panels, guys. All right.